"So what are your plans for the cabin?" That was the first thing my son said to me the morning we buried his mother. Not, "How are you holding up, Dad?" Not, "I'm here." He stood at the edge of the grave in a coat that cost more than my first truck, looked out at the mountains, and asked about real estate. I didn't get angry. Something in me just went still. My wife died on a snowy February morning. Susan fought cancer for 2 years, and I held her hand through every round of it. By that first Christmas, my children had stopped asking how I was doing. By the third Christmas, they'd stopped calling at all. For 10 years I mailed cards. For 10 years I left voicemails into a silence that never answered back. For 10 years I watched my own family quietly erase me, one missed call at a time. Then one day I learned something they never expected. The money they were already counting on, the inheritance they whispered about over dinners. I was never invited to. I didn't have to leave it to them at all. And I just realized I had every right to do something else with it entirely. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you who I am first, because the details matter. My name is Harold Bennett. I'm 69 years old and I've lived in Colorado Springs my whole life. I started with one truck and a head full of stubbornness, hauling freight over the mountain passes in weather that would scare most men off the road. 40 years later, that one truck had become a regional logistics company worth several $1 million. These hands have changed tires at 2 a.m. in a January blizzard. They've signed payroll for 80 families. I know the smell of diesel and cold coffee better than I know most people now. If you've ever given everything you had to people who came to see it as something they were simply owed, if you know the particular ache of being treated like a bank account with a heartbeat, then stay with me. Every week on this channel we share real stories of patience, dignity and quiet justice. If that's the kind of story that finds you where you live, take a second and subscribe. It helps more than you know. It wasn't always like this. That's the part that still catches in my throat. When the kids were small, we had a ranch outside the city limits. Susan made a meatloaf on Sunday nights that the whole road could smell, and Ethan and Rebecca would come tearing in from the pasture with dirt on their knees. I taught Ethan to back a trailer when he was 12. I taught Rebecca to read a balance sheet at the kitchen table when she was 16, never dreaming she'd one day use that same skill to calculate how much she'd get when I was gone. I sold the company 2 years before Susan got sick. We were going to travel. We were going to sit on a porch somewhere warm and grow old slow. Instead, I spent the savings of my whole working life learning the names of oncology nurses. I'd do it again without a second's hesitation. Loving Susan was the easiest thing I ever did. It was after she died that the cold came in. Not all at once. That's the cruel part, it's never all at once. First Thanksgiving without her, I set the table for 4 out of habit. Ethan texted that something had come up. Rebecca said the drive was long with the kids. I ate alone, and I told myself they were grieving in their own way and needed time. The next year I didn't set 4 places. The year after that I didn't bother with the table at all. My birthday would pass. Father's Day would pass. I'd check the mailbox like a foolish old man waiting for a letter that wasn't coming. And still I want you to understand this. I kept trying. I mailed the grandkids gifts every birthday. I left cheerful voicemail so they wouldn't hear the loneliness in my voice. Just thinking of you. No need to call back. Love you all. I drove 2 hours to Rebecca's once, unannounced, with a basket of the peaches she loved as a girl. She met me on the porch. She didn't ask me in. She said the kids were napping. The peaches were still in my truck 3 days later, gone soft. I told myself I was imagining the pattern. Grief makes you doubt your own eyes, but the human heart keeps a ledger whether you want it to or not, and mine was starting to notice something. Every conversation we did have circled back to the same place. Ethan, calling out of nowhere after months of nothing. "So what are your plans for the cabin, Dad? Real estate up there is moving." Rebecca, over a rare lunch she cut short. "Have you updated your beneficiaries lately? You really should at your age. Never, are you sleeping all right? Never do you get lonely up there by yourself. Never, we miss you. Just cabins, just accounts, just beneficiaries." I started paying attention the way I used to study a freight contract before I signed it. Slow, careful, reading the lines under the lines. And here's where I have to be honest with you about something, because it changes how the rest of this story lands. I wasn't a man with nothing. When I sold that company, I didn't spend it all. The proceeds, the investment portfolio Susan and I built quietly over 40 years, the mountain cabin free and clear, all of it came to about $3.5 million. My children knew the number. I'd been foolish enough, years back, to be proud of it in front of them. What they didn't know was that an estate is not a promise, it's a decision, and decisions can be changed by the man who's still alive to make them. I kept that thought to myself. I smiled on the phone. I asked about the grandkids. I let them believe I was exactly what they assumed I was. A sad, soft old man, slowly drifting toward a finish line they'd already divided up between them. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday in spring, I ran into a man named Carl at the hardware store. He'd driven for me years ago, good man, straight as a fence post. We got to talking, and he went quiet in a way that told me something was coming. "Harold," he said, "I don't know if I should say this, but your boy Ethan, he was at the lodge a while back, having a few drinks, telling folks your estate was going to solve a lot of his problems one day." Carl wouldn't meet my eye. He said it like he was looking forward to it. I thanked Carl. I drove home. I didn't speed, didn't grip the wheel, didn't say a word out loud. Something in me went still in a way it never had before, because now I had questions, and the questions had teeth. How long had they been planning around the day I'd die instead of the years I was still living? Was it Ethan alone, or had Rebecca been running the same numbers in her own kitchen? And the one that kept me up that night, staring at Susan's empty side of the bed, they were already this certain the money was theirs. What would they do when they found out it wasn't? That weekend, I made a phone call no one in my family knew about, and by Monday morning the quiet work had already begun. The call I made that weekend was to an estate attorney 3 counties over, a woman with no connection to my children, no shared friends, no way for word to drift back. I told her I wanted to understand my options. She told me a man of sound mind can do almost anything he likes with what he's earned. That sentence sat with me for a long time after I hung up. Over the next 6 weeks I did the slow, quiet work. I had the cabin appraised and listed it through an out-of-town broker. I moved my investments out of the accounts my children somehow always seemed to know the balance of. I started drafting the shape of something new, and the whole time I kept smiling on the phone. That's the part I want you to sit with. When Ethan called to ask casually whether I'd thought any more about the cabin, I said I was considering my options. When Rebecca reminded me again to update my beneficiaries, I told her she was right, that I really ought to. I wasn't lying. I was just letting them believe the ending they'd written for me. They were so confident they'd already won that they never once thought to check whether the game had changed. If you've ever had to stay calm and keep your face still while you finally saw someone clearly, if you've ever protected your own peace by simply going quiet, then you understand exactly what those weeks felt like. If this story is sitting heavy in your chest right now, do me one small kindness and tap that like button. It tells me these stories are reaching the people who need them. There was one person in all of this. I couldn't let go cold, though. My granddaughter, Maddie, Rebecca's oldest, 17 now. Maddie was the only one who ever wrote back real letters in real handwriting, asking real questions. "Grandpa, what was Grandma like when she was young? Did you really drive over the mountains in the snow?" She mailed me a drawing of my old truck once. I still have it taped inside the cabinet door where I keep the coffee. She didn't want anything from me. She just liked me. At my age, you learn to tell the difference, and that difference is everything. So before I disappeared, and I'm getting to that, I made sure Maddie was looked after, quietly, a separate education trust in her name, sealed, untouchable by her mother, not a fortune, just enough to tell that girl, someday when she needed to hear it, that her grandfather had seen her clearly and loved her plainly. The innocent should never pay for what the guilty earn. Then one spring morning, I vanished. I sold the Colorado house. I disconnected the phone I'd carried for 15 years. I changed my address with no forwarding. I packed the truck, drove west until the land ran out, and stopped in a small town on the Oregon coast where the fog comes in soft and nobody knew my name or my net worth. I rented a little place near the water. I started fishing off the jetty in the mornings. I learned the names of the men at the bait shop. For the first time in 10 years I was seen, not for what I'd leave behind, but for who I was standing right there. Back in Colorado, I'm told, the phone started ringing into a void. Ethan called and called. Rebecca called. Then the lawyers called. They questioned the neighbors. They drove to the cabin and found a sold sign. Nobody knew where Harold Bennett had gone. For the first time in a decade, my children were desperate to reach me. And I want to be clear, it was never me they were trying to reach. It was the $3.5 million they could feel slipping out of their hands. Where was he? What happened to the money? Was the old man even still alive? Let them wonder, I thought. casting my line into the grey morning water. Let them feel, just once, what it is to call and have no one answer. 1 year later to the week, both my children received a letter from an attorney's office. Inside was a single document and a note in my own hand. The document informed them that the entire estate, all $3.5 million of it, had been irrevocably transferred into a charitable foundation. The Bennett Fund, it was called. Its purpose, to help aging truck drivers and blue-collar workers. The men and women who break their bodies for 40 years and find there's nothing left at the end of the road, afford the retirement they were never able to save for. The same people I'd worked beside my whole life, the ones who'd actually shown up for me when it mattered. And the letter. I'd thought about every word. For 10 years, I waited for my children to ask how I was doing. Instead, you asked about cabins, investments, beneficiaries. You planned your future around my death, so I chose to build someone else's future with my life. I wasn't there to see their faces when they read it, but I didn't need to be. I'd watched their false confidence for 10 years. I could picture the exact moment it collapsed. The pale faces, phone calls between them, furious and frightened. The slow understanding that there was nothing to contest, no document to break, no soft old man left to guilt only a foundation, legally sealed, already at work. The money they'd been so sure was theirs had been theirs only in their own imaginations. I'd simply stopped pretending otherwise. There was no cruelty in it. I want you to understand that. I didn't take anything from them that was ever truly theirs. A man's estate in a longs and his children are owed. It's the final say of the person who earned it. I just used mine. I'm still here, on the Oregon coast, still alive despite what they may have feared or hoped, still fishing off that jetty most mornings. I have a friend named Walt who saves me the good crab pots, and a woman named Dorothy who runs the diner and remembers I take my eggs over hard. Maddie writes to me at my new address, the only one in the family who has it. She's coming to visit this summer. She wants to learn to fish. Here's what I've come to understand. After all of it, the greatest mistake I made wasn't giving my children too much. It was waiting 10 years for people to become who they'd already shown me they weren't. Generosity handed to people who mistake it for weakness will always be taken as permission. And the day I finally stopped waiting, the day I stopped reaching for a door that had been closed for years, was the day my life started again. If this story reached something in you, give it a like. It truly helps these stories find their way to people who need them. Subscribe if you want more stories of patience, dignity, and quiet justice, because we share a new one every week. And tell me in the comments, has someone in your life ever mistaken your kindness for something they were entitled to? I read every one, and if you know someone who's been made to feel forgotten by the very people who should have loved them, share this with them. Sometimes a person just needs to hear they were never the foolish one for caring. I cared. I'm still glad I did. I just finally stopped waiting.